This is a very, very important moment in our nation's history. And New Hampshire citizens, you Granite Staters, have a very important role to play in determining the conversation that dominates not only our presidential election, but really dominates the next 4 years of American history. So it's a real honor, it's a real privilege to get to talk to you, who carry a very important responsibility. I look at a political campaign as a long job interview, and you're interviewing me for the job. And there's something, like I said, there's something profound about that. I feel it's my responsibility to tell you what I would do with the levers of presidential power if you give them to me. I have a very different agenda than President Biden does, a very different agenda than Robert Kennedy does, and I look forward to the opportunity here today to tell you what mine is. I want to start at the beginning, and by the beginning I mean the beginning of our nation's history, because I think that we have lost the plot in this country. And one of the reasons we've lost the plot is because we don't remind ourselves of it enough. And when we do, we have a very different sense of where we are at this moment in history and what our responsibility is. You know, American democracy is not just about our rights, it's also about our responsibilities that come along with those rights. So let's go back a little bit to 1776. In 1776, 56 very brave men signed a document called our Declaration of Independence. Now I say they were brave because if the British had won the war, they would have been tried and presumably, maybe not even tried, simply executed as traitors against the King of England. By signing that document, they infused into our nation's founding the most socially and politically enlightened principles that had ever formed the founding of a nation. With that document, they repudiated centuries of a social order in which the king, the queen, and their rich friends, the aristocracy, were deemed entitled to whatever resources of the land that they wanted. And that made every other citizen, for the most part, little more than a serf in servitude to the wishes and the desires and the requirements of the upper classes and the monarchy. Our document said something completely different. The Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That was radical in 1776, and it's radical today. It not only informed them, but it should inform every generation of Americans. The second principle was that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. The third principle is that governments are instituted to secure those rights. That's very significant. The government is not here just to protect the rights of those in power. It is here to secure the rights of all men, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the fourth principle in the Declaration of Independence is that if government is not doing that job, then it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, like I said, that was radical in 1776, and it's radical today. And the Declaration, in a very real sense, is our mission statement. And whether you have a personal mission statement or the mission statement for a company or an organization or a country, your power lies in revisiting your mission statement, reminding yourself, who are we and what are we doing here? It reminds us of our rights and it reminds us of our responsibilities. Abraham Lincoln said about the Declaration of Independence that it is an eternal rebuke to forces of tyranny and oppression. Now, those 56 men signing that document is where it all started, but it's also where it got quite gnarly, because 41 of those 56 were slave owners. Now that's very significant. That's America's DNA. It means that we have always been both and. We have always been a nation founded on the principles of the greatest social and political alignment that the world has ever seen. And we are also a country that has been filled from the beginning, in every generation, with forces that for their own financial and or ideological purposes have no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles made manifest. And those forces have proven over and over and over again that they would do whatever it took to make sure that the primacy of their property rights, that the primacy of their financial and or ideological requirements would come before life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all men. Now, over time, whether it had to do with abolition, which was our response to slavery, whether it had to do with women's suffrage movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment, granting women to right, which was our response, the right to vote, which was our response to the institutional suppression of women, whether it was the establishment of organized labor, which was our nation's response to the Gilded Age and the overreach of financial capital represented by the Gilded Age, or whether it had to do with the civil rights movement, which was a generation's response to the institutional suppression of Black people through segregation in the American South. Over time, this country has tended to self-correct. And that is what it means to say that in every generation, our responsibility is to, quote unquote, create a more perfect union. That means in those places where we are not aligned with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, it is every generation's responsibility to recognize that, and in our time, put the country back on track. I'm running for president because that struggle is as active today as at any other time in our history. Today, it is not an institution like slavery or an institution like segregation which transgresses against our principles. Today, it is the institutionalization of corporate greed. There is a matrix of corporate overlords: insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, big banks, big oil companies, and defense companies, defense contracting companies. They have such power and such undue influence on Congress itself that our government itself has become a system of legalized bribery. The money that those corporations are able to exert, particularly since a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United, is so great that in case after case, issue after issue, public policy after public policy, our legislators, our government, from Supreme Court to the White House to the Senate to the House, do more to serve the short-term profit maximization goals of their corporate donors than they do to serve our safety, our health, and our well-being. Now, if the Declaration of Independence says that all of us have the right to unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and if governments are instituted to secure those rights, why are there so many carcinogens in our food? Why is there 46% of the urban water supply in the United States filled with PFAS or forever chemicals? Why don't we have what they have in every other advanced democracy, which is universal health care? Why are there 1.3 million Americans rationing their insulin? Why are 1/3 of America's workers living on less than $15 an hour and half of them unable to find a place to live? Why are there so many people out of 600,000 homeless people in the United States themselves working full-time? Why is there a climate crisis and at the same time our government giving more oil drilling permits to big oil than even Trump did? And why have we fought wars that in the final analysis were fought for no other reason than to fill the coffers of the military-industrial complex? Why is that? It is because an oligarchy, which means rule by the very rich, has actually replaced democracy as our governing principle, and soulless economic values have replaced humanitarian values and democratic values. This has been going on now, not that we were ever perfect, not that I'm romanticizing American democracy or American capitalism before the last 50 years, but over the last 50 years, we have entered an aberrational chapter of American history. It is an aberrational chapter of American history in which an economic paradigm, and this economic paradigm is often called trickle-down economics. It's often called neoliberalism. It's often called crony capitalism or vulture capitalism. It's like a malevolent strain of capitalism in which corporate profits are made the governing principle. And we were sold a bill of goods when this was initiated. The American people were told that if we did everything possible, if governmental policy did everything possible to make it easier for stockholders and CEOs to make more money, that they would create jobs. And so all that money would trickle down. Now, before then, it was the social and political and economic agreement in this country that there are many stakeholders in a corporation. There are the stockholders, they have a stake, but there are also the workers. They have a stake. There is the environment has a stake. There's the community has a stake. But oh no, so the Reaganomics, neoliberal, trickle-down theory went. No. Just do what you can to make more money for the stockholders. They will be the job creators. Well, this is the problem. Their business model has never been job creation. Their business model was job elimination. You eliminate jobs so there will be more money for the stockholders. And their business model was worker exploitation. It was the demonization of unions. It was union busting. It was tax cuts for the very, very rich. And it was deregulation, this orgy of deregulation. It's all this con. It's all this PR con. Deregulate, they're job-killing regulations. We're talking safety regulations here. We're talking health regulations here. We're talking benefits here. Now, there's a pretty wide diversity of age in this room. So I'm going to tell those of you who are students, those of you who are younger, I'm going to tell you something that a few of us in this room remember. You might not even believe me. You might think, oh, she must be talking about a fairy tale. But there are other people in this room who will say, no, I was there too. Are you ready for this? It was a long ago, faraway land called the 1970s. And in the 1970s, the average American worker had decent benefits. And the average American worker could afford a house. And the average American worker could afford a car. And the average American worker could afford a yearly vacation. And the average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home to take care of the kids if they so chose. And that average American couple could afford to send their kids to college. 1970s. And since that time, with the advent of Reaganomics, the Reagan Revolution, since the advent of trickle-down economics, there has been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth away from 90% of the American people. This has hollowed out, it has decimated our middle class, to the point where, as I said before, the carcinogens in our food. Do you know that there are American food companies who will sell the same product in Europe that they sell here, but they have to make the product differently in Europe or Canada because those countries will not allow the carcinogenic elements that are placed in the food here just to give it a longer shelf life so those food companies can make more money. The only reason we have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt is because of the greed of the insurance companies. The only reason we have over 1 million people rationing their insulin is because of the greed of the pharmaceutical companies. The only reason we're giving more permits for oil drilling is because of the greed of big oil. The only reason we don't have even common sense gun safety laws in this country is because of the greed of the gun manufacturers. And the only reason we have fought wars that should never have been fought is because of the greed of the defense industry. And yet the government that should be advocating for us, because in the Declaration of Independence it says it is the government's job to support, to secure our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which certainly should include eating and knowing that this food's not going to give me cancer, which certainly should include knowing I can give a glass of water to my child and it's not going to have forever chemicals in it, which obviously should include my ability to self-actualize and young people's ability to have higher education like they do in every other advanced democracy without being loaded with these college loan debts that were simply the vulture capitalists preying on our young. But the system at this point is such that government itself is held hostage by the tyrannous power of these corporate overlords. So great is their undue financial influence on Congress, White House, and the Supreme Court. At this point, that system will not disrupt itself. We're at a point now where it's our turn to do what our ancestors did, push back. Whether it was the abolitionists or the women's suffragists or the labor organizers or the civil rights movement, they stood up, they said no, they pushed back. And at the time that they stood up and pushed back, they were told it could never happen. They were told it can't happen. The other side has too much power, too much money, it's all locked. And surely they had desperate days. But I remind you, we need to remember, they prevailed. It's our turn now, and so will we. But this is the issue. Looking to that system to disrupt itself is naive and absurd at this point. I'm running for president because it's time for the people to step in. We need to do an intervention on our own government. Now, the system would tell you, oh, no, don't listen to her. And it makes sure that CNN doesn't have me on and MSNBC doesn't have me on, and they really, this political media industrial complex, they stand as gatekeepers. They have a way of suppressing your vote by suppressing the voices of the candidates. Now, I used to think it's because they're just serving all these huge corporate interests. But now I realize, no, it's bigger than that. They are serving those corporate interests. They are corporate interests. And they have absolutely no intention. And I'm not saying some of them aren't nice people. This is not about nice people versus not nice people. And not every rich person in America is a greedy bastard either. This is really important for us to not personalize any of this. It is the way the systems operate at this point. And that system has absolutely no intention of letting you be exposed. If there's anything they can do to make sure that you're not even exposed to another option, whether it has to do with suppressing the appearance of candidacies such as mine in the media, or downright character assassination. Nothing to look at there, folks. She's kooky. Nothing to look at there. She's not a serious candidate. I am the serious candidate here. I'm the one talking about the fact that the United States has the highest poverty rate of any advanced democracy. I'm the one talking about breast cancer and other cancer diagnoses in the Granite State. I'm the one who's talking about hunger in the Granite State. I'm talking about ending the drug war to actually address the root cause, spending a fraction of what we now spend on a drug war that does not help but rather exacerbates the drug addiction situation. Let us spend a fraction of the $100 billion we spend every year on a national network of world-class recovery options. It is time to treat drug addiction not as a criminal issue, but as a health issue. Almost half of our federal prison population are non-violent drug offenders. When I was in college, 300,000 people were incarcerated in the United States back in the 1970s. Yet today, 2.3 million. It is time for us to have a Department of Peace so that we take as seriously the mission and the task of waging peace as we now, when we must, make sure that we have the capacity to wage war. We need a Department of Children and Youth. America's children are at risk on levels that are not seen in any other advanced democracy. It's time for universal health care. It's time for tuition-free college and tech school. It's time to cancel those college loan debts. It is time for free childcare. It is time for paid family leave. It is time for guaranteed sick pay. It's time for guaranteed housing, and it's time for a guaranteed living wage. And I want to say this. Everything that I just said is considered a moderate position in every other advanced democracy. But here, we've been trained to expect too little. That's why those of us who remember things like the 1970s, we're the keepers of the story. It's important that we remind kids, it actually wasn't like this when I was growing up. Because you have whole generations growing up with an understandable sense of despair and hopelessness, because they look and they don't see, well, what's going to happen to me? Even if I went to college, how many of them, I can't even imagine. You know, debt is crippling. But to be in your 20s, and carrying tens of thousands of dollars worth of college loan debt, I've heard young people say to me, well, I got the degree in the field I want to go into. But to go into a beginning position in that field, I don't even think that in that field I will even begin to be able to pay off my college loans for another 15 years. That's outrageous. And then we wonder where the mental health crisis comes from. We wonder where everybody's anxiety comes from. When you have 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, when you have over 3 million people evicted last year alone, which is greater than even during the housing crisis, when you have an article that came out in the New York Times yesterday saying that the population, the biggest population of people being evicted right now are babies and toddlers. What are we doing? What are we doing? And yet this will not stop of itself. And if we continue to vote for the people whose careers have been ensconced in driving us into this ditch, there's something wrong about the fact that they're saying that you should only consider qualified to be president someone whose career has been ensconced in the car that drove us into this ditch. I think the opposite. I think something happens to you when you become ensconced in that system. There's something that it becomes very insular. You know, I live in Washington, D.C., and I was always told, you know, Washington is like a bubble. But I have to tell you, it's worse than that. It's like a walled city. People are emotionally buffered from the kind of despair and anxiety that those of us who just live in America see every day. And it's not that there aren't nice people there. Once again, this isn't about not nice people. And it also isn't about the fact that there are people within that system, in Congress, in the Senate, who don't believe exactly everything that I've said, who agree with me entirely. So my question about that is, where are they? Why aren't they running? Oh, because they're lining up behind the DNC. They haven't been permitted to run by the DNC. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 weeks. 1 of them, 2 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them, they might decide to come in. And they will be the bright, shiny object, younger version of the same thing we have now. And then we're supposed to believe that they, who didn't have the courage to stand up to the DNC until they got permission, we're supposed to believe they're going to have what it takes to stand up to the insurance companies, and to stand up to the pharmaceutical companies, and to stand up to big oil, and to stand up to defense contractors. I tell you what you need, someone who's not part of that system. Someone that they can't do anything for. That's not where I come from. And our Constitution did not declare a political class. As a matter of fact, George Washington warned us in his farewell address about what could happen with political parties. He said political parties could form factions of men, he said, more loyal to their party than to their country. And John Adams said he saw political parties as the greatest threat to our democracy. Now, I'm not anti-political party, but I'm anti the dominance, the role of gatekeeper that they now have presumed unto themselves. I'm what I think of as a Roosevelt Democrat. Roosevelt believed that government's job was to help people. The very notion of helping people has now been demonized. The oldest PR con in the book, oh, that's socialist. But you know, as Martin Luther King said, if they give it to the poor, they call it a handout. But if they give it to the rich, it's called a subsidy. We subsidize to the tune of billions of dollars corporations that are already making billions of dollars in profit, and then turn around with those profits and with what they manufactured, they price gouge the American people. Franklin Roosevelt said that the biggest job of the presidency is not administrative, but rather moral leadership. These things are immoral. Now, Franklin Roosevelt said something else. He said that the way we would be sure that we would never have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country is if democracy delivered on its promises. Democracy is not delivering on its promises here. And I understand that many of us who are old enough, we have enough memory of a time, those of us who are Democrats, when, yeah, the Democratic Party is not perfect, but more than not, you know, they're the advocates for the working people of the United States. There are young people today who have no memory of a time when either party did anything for you. And I understand that. And I understand the rage, and I understand the upset, and I understand the frustration, and I understand the anger, and I understand the depression that people are falling into, and the nihilism and the cynicism, and that is very dangerous. And I'm running to say, we must have faith in one another and hope in what is possible. That is what the abolitionists had, that is what the women's suffragists had, that is what the civil rights movement had, and that is what the early labor organizers had. And you feel that in this country today. You feel one world falling apart, and you feel another world struggling to be born. Now, that means everything I've said here. It means that we need to make an economic U-turn in this country. We don't need to just tweak things here and there. We don't need just incremental changes. Eleanor Roosevelt said to Franklin Roosevelt, we need more than the amelioration of stress, she said. We need fundamental economic reform. And the things I've mentioned to you, as I told you before, moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. And the establishment will say, oh, far left, fringe, long shot, crazy person, because they want you to believe that. I'm no more a long shot than Donald Trump was. I'm no more a long shot at this point in the game than Bill Clinton was, or even Barack Obama was. This choice is supposed to be in your hands. And so what I'm submitting to you is an agenda for a new era of American history. We need to cut the cord with an aberrational chapter of American history in which corporations were given more power than you. That's not what this country was supposed to be. And in me, you would not have a president trying to have it both ways, trying to help you in whatever way I could, but not so much as to challenge the underlying corporate forces whose power over you would absolutely ensure the inevitability of your suffering to return. Because I don't want to piss them off, because I need them in the next election, not only because I'm not a candidate who would be worrying, ooh, they might primary me. I wouldn't be there for that. But also because even though I believe in the basic pillars of the Democratic Party, I think both major political parties, neither one of them right now have anything to be self-congratulatory about. And even the Democratic Party, which I love, I've been a Democrat all my life, but I'll tell you something, about those fascists who are at the door, they should never have gotten so close. And they wouldn't have gotten so close if democracy had been delivering on its blessings. It's time, once again, as has been true many times in our history, for us to course correct the trajectory of this nation. Abolition didn't come from a major political party. It came from the abolitionist party. Women's suffrage didn't come from a major political party. It came from the Women's Party. Same is true with the civil rights movement. Same is true with the early labor organizers. We have been taught to limit our political imaginations. We've been trained to expect too little, and we've been trained to forget that the power lies in our hands. It still lies in our hands. We've just been taught to forget that. We've been taught that one was like wild and crazy to say, well, actually, we're the people, and we're supposed to say how things go. And with my campaign, I hope to remind you, and if you believe as I do, that something precious is slipping away, if you believe as I do, that this matrix of corporate overlords have gone too far and are given too much power, and that they need to back off so that we have safe food to feed our children, and clean water to feed our children, and clean air for our children to breathe, and safe schools for our children, and safe streets for our children, and a planet that we can consider reasonably guaranteed to still hold for the habitability of the species in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And if we as citizens have the right to expect that if any American soldier is sent to war, it better be for a damn good reason. If you believe that, I hope you'll take very seriously the possibility of voting for me in the primary in January, because the DNC could take delegates from me, but they can't take the significance of the New Hampshire primary from you. I realize who I'm talking to. I realize I'm talking to the big mohos here, because you have the power to determine the conversation. You have the time, you have the power to be able to say to the rest of the United States, and in a way to the world, with this primary, despite the pressure of the DNC, despite the pressures of the political class, we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to vote for a candidate who wants to turn this ship around. And I would seek to turn it around with wisdom and responsibility and with compassion. And in my term, I would not be able to turn it all the way around. We're headed for the iceberg. And one political party is going straight for it, and the other major political party is going at it more slowly and would hit it at a different angle. I'd get us around the curve. I wouldn't be able to, in my 4-year term, get it all the way around, but I can get us around the curve. And at that point, hand it to a younger generation. You guys will take it from here. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about anything that you'd like to talk about. Oh, thank you so much. Who'd like to begin? Any questions you have? Yes, sir. And I think he's going to go.
So I've seen that you've been very popular with Gen Zers, particularly left-leaning ones.
You know what, honey? I didn't hear you. Hold on a moment. Okay.
So I've seen that you've been pretty popular with Gen Zers, pretty leftist-leaning ones. I've seen you on Twitch with Son Piker.
You know what?
Like
There's a problem for me. You're talking into the mic, and with my hearing aids, it's kind of canceling. Can you ask me the question actually without the mic? Yes.
So, yeah, I've seen that you've been very popular with all these left-leaning
Okay.
Gen Zers and stuff like that. But if you secure the nomination, what would you say to all these crypto-fascist Republican candidates?
Okay.
Are they gonna be like, oh, she's crazy, she has all these new age ideas.
Okay. Actually, interestingly enough, it's not the Republicans who are saying that right now. It's the corporatist Democrats who are saying that. So let's be very clear what's going on in this country. This is a very interesting moment. There's an awakening on both the right and the left about corporate tyranny. You have people on the right as well as on the left who are upset about the dominance of corporate entities. So I've had people who have come to my lectures, say they're Republicans, say they're conservatives, say that they're former Trump voters, who would vote for me. Because the majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech schools. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, including gun owners, want common sense gun safety laws. This is a new moment. And now, what you just said, let's analyze what's going on here. You talked about my popularity among Gen Z, for instance. And so people in the traditional Democratic elites, corporatist establishment say, oh, she's only popular with young people. No, 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 no. It's that young people have been able to hear me because I can get on TikTok. But those same people who are saying that about me have made sure I can't be on CNN, have made sure I can't be on MSNBC, all of which I was on last time. I had a CNN town hall last time. I am higher in the polls than most of the people who were on that Republican stage debate the other night. And yet they have regular appearances on the Sunday news shows, etc. The people who are making sure that I can't be on those programs are not doing it because they think I'm unserious. They're doing it because they realize how serious I am. So if I got the nomination, and this is where you come in, if I can hit the polls high enough in this state, and if I can hit the polls high enough in the country, they will have to have me on. So what will happen during the nominating, during the general election, if I am the nominee, is that I think that what I'm talking about is an economic new beginning for the United States of America. You know, Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are high-minded conservative values, there are high-minded liberal values. I myself am left of center, but I'll tell you something, I know some very intelligent conservative people. I've read books by very intelligent conservative people where I find that I don't come to the same conclusion that they came to, but I was informed by their analysis. And some of their analysis was important things to remember as well. So I think, you know, what you just said is the narrative would argue that it has to be Biden. I would argue, if you really want to win in 2024, I'm the better candidate, and I'll tell you why. In 2020, it was all about be afraid, be very afraid. And we were of the fascist threat. But there was also the feeling in 2020, which we look back at, realized was kind of naive, that if only we could defeat Trump, that this country could go back to normal. And now people realize something is wrong at a deeper level. It's not that simple. This will not be an election like 2020. I think it will be an election more like 2016. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump both said to the American people, you have a right to be angry, the system is rigged against you. The difference was that Bernie really meant it and would have done something about it. Hillary Clinton lost, and she was saying, let's just continue the success of the last 8 years. And too many millions of people said, what success? I'm drowning here. If we try to win in 2024, Bidenomics is great. That really, what is the president's agenda for the next 4 years? Let's finish the job. That's all he feels he has to offer to you. And that Bidenomics has been great. Let me tell you who it's been great for. It's been great for me. It's been great for anyone who is among the 20% of top earners in the United States. But that's the problem. A thriving middle class doesn't mean that 20% are doing well. What we have is 20% who are doing fine, surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. There is nothing in the president's conversation today that acknowledges the level of hopelessness, cynicism, and nihilism that is taking seed in this country, and it is dangerous. And among other things, that is what makes us vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces, whether it has to do with QAnon or Nazis or any manner of neo-authoritarian or neo-fascist forces. This is not funny. These people are here now. It's not something coming down the road. So none of this, oh, well, it's nice to get this message out, and then maybe in 2028. This is an urgent moment of need. I'll tell you something else about why I think I'm the better candidate for those of you who want the Democrats to win in 2024. Robert Kennedy has announced that he's got some big announcement on October 9th. We don't know for sure whether he's going to be announcing that he's running independent or libertarian, we don't know. But he will be a factor. And he will apparently, from what they say, and I don't have any inside scoop, but this is what the news reports are, that he will not be running as a Democrat. The danger to the Democrats in 2024 in an electoral sense is not Donald Trump. The people who vote for Donald Trump are going to vote for Donald Trump. The people who are going to vote for Donald Trump are going to vote for him even if he's in prison. What we have to worry about is people staying home. What we have to worry about is people not feeling inspired enough to even vote. What we have to worry about is a younger generation that says, you want me to vote for somebody who gave more oil drilling permits than Trump did? You want me to vote for someone who approved the Willow Project? No, I'm staying home. So what that means is what the Democratic nominee in 2024 is going to have is the ability to stand in a way that will win against Cornel West and Bobby Kennedy, both of whom I know. There's no personal animus here at all. But I match Bobby in his fervor about anti-corporate and corporate capture of the U.S. government, and I stand tall with Cornel in a commitment to social justice. So if you want to win as a Democrat in 2024, first of all, this is not a time when any of us should feel that we can't even have a conversation about who would win. But also I submit to you that when you do have that analysis, I look really, really good. Does that make sense? This is very, very serious, and I'm really grateful to even have the opportunity to tell you what my agenda is and why I believe it's the win, not only for 2024, but for the next 4 years in America. Are we okay?
Yeah, we have.
Yes, and then this gentleman as well.
Right. So given your speech about, do you want me to speak into
Well, as long as I can hear you, it's about my ears, but this seems okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It has to do with where we're standing.
Yeah, given your speech about the military-industrial complex and pointless wars to sort of fund it, how do you stand on Ukraine, which we have been funding for the past, I think, year or two now, which seems to be going into a forever war?
Okay.
And I think that that money would be better spent on welfare, on infrastructure, and on improving the American system here. I think that we don't have the money right now to be funding our own little proxy war in Eastern Europe.
Okay. So this is how I see Ukraine, which is in some ways different than how you see Ukraine. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain to you how I see it. We do have a forever war machine in the United States. It is a big problem. We need to cut off the head of that snake. No doubt about it. If I am president, we will not have a former Raytheon board member as the head of the Defense Department. We will have a cut in defense spending to the best of my ability at the rate of about 20%. If I am president, we will have a Department of Peace. If I am president, we will have a greatly bolstered State Department, which will once again be about diplomacy more than it's about arms sales to, for instance, 60% of the world's autocrats. All of that is true. But this is how I see the US military. I see the military like I view a surgeon. If the United States has to have surgery, you better believe we need to have the best surgeon, and we need to have that best surgeon available at all times. But a reasonable person tries to avoid surgery. We did not do that with Iraq. We did not do that with the last 20 years in Afghanistan. I'm sure you and I would be 100% in agreement about the criminality of those ventures. Okay, so we're in agreement so far. And I bet we're also in agreement that when it comes to Russia, we poked the bear. We're in agreement about our playing fast, footloose and free with NATO. We're in agreement. The Aegis missiles should never have been in Poland. We're in a disagreement. This is where I think you and I probably diverge. I don't think anything that I just said justifies Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That's where I believe that you and I diverge. I see it, there's a lot of talk about it being a proxy war as though there's nothing else to discuss. There's a lot of nuance in foreign policy. There's Europe, there's Latvia, there's Estonia, there's Lithuania, there's Sweden, there's Finland wanting to join NATO, which they stood away from for years. A lot of this, where we might diverge, would have to do with what your gut says about Vladimir Putin's intentions versus what my gut might say about Vladimir Putin's intentions. Do we need to have a negotiated settlement? Absolutely. And the United States should be absolutely a part of that. There was a meeting in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago. China was there, Brazil was there, India was there, we were there. This has to be a global operation. What we're talking about here, and remember, when you talked about the money, we've given about 1/10 of what we spend on military budget every year. When you talked about the money being better spent, I couldn't agree more that that amount of money should be spent and much more on things such as universal health care. But it isn't like, well, if we didn't spend that money, it would go over to health care. And some people believe, people that I highly respect, good friends, if we just had a ceasefire right now, this is what Cornell says, this is what Bobby says. I resent the fact that they call themselves the peace candidates and me the war candidate, because let's follow this through. Okay, if we said right now there's going to be a ceasefire, right now we got to have a ceasefire in the United States and going to give another dime. What do you think Vladimir Putin's going to say? Do you think Vladimir Putin's going to say, well, that's good, okay, I'll stop? He'd be cracking open all the champagne bottles in Moscow. They're gone. And he would crush Ukraine. To say that what would happen in the event of our saying, okay, we're stopping, is peace, it would be the opposite of peace. So let's not call that a pro-peace position. The issue is when and how to get to peace. And I'll even grant you that there are people in Washington, D.C., part of the blob, who do want this just as a forever war. Believe me, I don't. But he took Crimea, takes a beat, comes back. Other people, perhaps you, sir, I don't know, say give him what he wants now and he won't go any further. It's the gut call. I don't think that. I don't. I think that he will take a beat and be back. As a matter of fact, I don't think he would leave because he's right there right now. I just think he'd come down. And so while I appreciate your perspective, my conclusion about where that leaves us right now, I'll even give it to you about Boris Johnson. I'm not in any way, when he went and tried to have negotiations early, Naftali Bennett said some things, I'm not saying the United States has clean hands here, but there's a difference between someone who has dirty hands and someone who's genuinely evil. And for that reason, that is my position about Ukraine. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to have that conversation with you. Yes, sir. That was about Ukraine also? Does anybody else have any? Yes, sir.
With the student newspaper.
Pardon? Oh, student newspaper.
Yeah, I'm
cool.
from New England.
Okay.
Student newspaper here. And I was wondering, because I know a big domestic policy for a lot of people right now is the idea of renewable energy in the United States. So my question really is, what should the U.S. be doing regarding energy, and what types of energy resources do you support?
Okay. It is time. We don't have any more time. It is time to ramp down fossil fuel extraction. There would be no further permits given for fossil fuel extraction. The first thing I would do is cancel the Willow Project. The second thing I would do is bring all of our lawyers and the EPA together, drop the plan, and tell me on what day I can declare a climate emergency. I will declare a climate emergency, and I will begin a World War II level mass mobilization for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. You will see massive investments in green. You will be stopping the investments in dirty, and you will see millions of jobs, by the way, created because of it. Now, there's only one thing I want to say about that. There is a term that I just use that you hear around these things often. When we talk about a transition from a war economy to a peace economy, when we talk about a transition from a dirty energy grid to a clean energy grid, notice that I use the word just, a just transition. Why do we use that word? And I'll tell you why. I had a man come up to me and he said, Ms. Williamson, I make over 6 figures in a job that is indirectly related to big oil. What are you telling me exactly? That you want me to go make $15 an hour putting in solar panels? He has a valid reason to ask that question. He has a right to ask that question, and he absolutely must not be forgotten in the process. Now, there are thousands and thousands of people who work in technology, research, and manufacturing. We need to make a lateral move that does not allow those people to fall through the cracks. That would be extremely important to me. There would be an entire department set up to make sure that these people have first dibs and that there would be an actual well-strategized transition relating to all of those thousands of people. I would be making every effort possible to partner with Big Well. Listen, we all know this. They knew decades ago. They knew decades ago what they were doing and the harm it would cause. And they also know now, these people are not stupid. They know it's over. They just want to squeeze every last dollar out. I want to sit down with them and I want to say, I want to partner with you on this, but the days are over when I'm just begging you. And that's why you declare a climate emergency. I am no longer asking you, I am telling you, we are going to put the health, the safety, and the well-being of the American people first. See, we need a mother in the White House. You can take that however you want. Do you know, one of my favorite stories from history also involves Franklin Roosevelt. When we had to get into World War II, we hardly had any kind of an army. We did not have any kind of military compared to what we needed. Hitler had been building up his military for 5 years. And every time he went to another country, invaded another country, I should say, he absorbed their military capacity. So Franklin Roosevelt needed a certain number of ships, and he needed a certain number of planes, and he needed a certain number of tanks. So who do you go to? The great industrial powers at building such machinery? The car manufacturers. And he calls the big three car manufacturers, the same ones that the UAW is striking against now, into his office in Washington. And he said, gentlemen, I need this many ships, and I need this many tanks, and I need this many planes. And they said to him, President Roosevelt, we are patriotic Americans. And as soon as we sell our quota of cars, we'll be there for you, sir, and we'll make those ships, and we'll make those planes, and we'll make those tanks. Do you know what Franklin Roosevelt said to them? Gentlemen, I don't think you understand what I just said. I need this many ships, and I need this many tanks, and I need this many planes. And you're not going to make another car until I get them. In other words, it was a national emergency. And in a national emergency, the emergency overrides what would in normal circumstances be the normal capitalist practices by which a company is seeking to create profit. It wasn't that he didn't respect their need to create profit, and ultimately there was a partnership in all of this, and I would look forward to building that partnership with the companies that now are raping the planet. But they will know that the days of their dominance are over. It needs to be a new day. We can't just tweak things. You can't say, as the president is saying, and which, it's not like even like I'm trying to convince you, an entire generation is not convinced. When this president brags about his, yes, to a great extent, healthy investment in green energy in the Inflation Reduction Act with one hand, and on the other hand, more oil drilling permits even than Trump, on the other hand, approving the Willow Project, on the other hand, approving the defense budget, by which the U.S. defense establishment is the single largest global emitter of greenhouse gases, all of which completely nullify the investments in green energy. I'm sorry, we've all been played. And if anything, I would want my presidency to be, it's a time in which Americans were no longer played, and Americans were no longer conned. And part of what made the change was a president who lays it down and says it the way it is. And I would be as honest with you when I'm president, and I would lay it down this truthfully as president as I'm doing as a candidate. And with all my heart, I believe that's what this country needs. Thank you very, very much. I so appreciate it. Thank you.